that really drove the book, and this is to me the really interesting part of this, was that from my view and the view of the other editors and many of the contributors, probably not all of them, but many of them, was that the 1985 Act was a wondrous thing. It really was. When we look at the Act, forget the 20 years, now 22 years worth of implementation struggles. When you look at what was intended by the Growth Management Act of 1985, it was a very powerful piece of legislation. It really put planning and comprehensive plans at the center of all local, regional, and state land use decisions. I don't want to steal Secretary Pelham's thunder, so I'm not going to detail what it was designed to do, but there was a very powerful intent that planning could truly help us and make a difference in the state of Florida. The way we write about this in the book is we call it, we say the 1985 Growth Management Act fundamentally changed planning in Florida and the United States. Why? Because people said, what's going on there in Florida? Georgia sat up and paid attention and did some things. Washington State sat up and paid attention and did some things. And they, for lack of a better term, borrowed from some of what we've done in Florida, as have other states. We write that it was a near-perfect version of the planning profession's comprehensive planning model. Not only do we create comprehensive plans, but they're actually supposed to be meaningful documents. They're supposed to guide infrastructure investments. They're supposed to be visionary. They're not just land use plans. They're not just sort of general plans that may gather dust on a shelf. They are supposed to guide local land development regulations. It's supposed to be sort of the foundation of the future. This idea that the comprehensive plan laid out that roadmap for the future. All right. On top of all that, the state committed back in 1985 to be a major player in the game. The Department of Community Affairs was heavily involved. The state back in 85, 86, and 87 promised to actually fund this thing called growth management. We'll hear more about that later. All these state agencies were required to pay attention to planning and to be beholden to these things called comprehensive plans. Again, planning was at the center of it all, a very powerful, wonderful thing. So again, to me, the politics, the 20-year anniversary, the Florida State University trying to get back in the game, if you will, in terms of growth management, all of that drove the book. But for me, what really drove the book is we've got one of the most powerful, ambitious, far-reaching programs for managing growth in the nation. And it was time for us to take a really detailed look at whether or not it was working, and if so, how, and if not, why not. So that's more or less what drove the book. And I think that what we'll hear from the speakers that follow, including me a few more times, is that we've got some real positive movements, but some other movement that has been a lot less positive. And with that, I will sort of stop so we can move on to the speakers, and you can hear about some of the chapters in the book.
Tim? Well, Tim called the event in 1985 wondrous. I happen to have been a witness to some of those wondrous events, and they took place in the legislature. And that's an oxymoron. But I must say, and it gives me a chance to provide a little historical perspective, Dr. DeGroat was on a leave of absence from his position as directing the Joint Center from FAU and was the Secretary of DCA at the request of former Governor and former Senator Bob Graham. And he went there with a purpose in his mind, and all of you know John know that he had that in focus. And we were going to do some significant additions to the Growth Management Act. The irony of it, and this is truly an aspect of how things go around, is that when we started, we had a fairly narrow sense of what we could accomplish. Because we were going to try to take the act from an advisory and no enforcement up to the next level. And the staff was told, take the coastal management element and rewrite it. It was one of 8 or 9 elements. And so if you read the law today, you'll see this fairly extensive coastal management element. Well, we went to the legislature and they said, that's fine, but we want the whole act to be enforceable and rewritten. So during the session, the rest of the law got written. And there's a disproportion to the way the language actually exists. As the years went by, a couple years later, we had a change in administration, and those of us that had the pleasure of working on the bill and the famous 9J5 rule Luckily, we were able to get out of town just in the nick of time. We were able to hand over to the new administration the honor of implementing all we had done. And boy, we leave them a mess. So, Tom Pelham was appointed secretary for the first time, and he can't, and I can't resist this. I'm about to introduce the finest gentleman that has ever fired me from a job. Tom Pelham is the secretary of the Florida Department of Community Affairs. He has extensive knowledge in this area, degrees in planning, and in Masters of Law, written on the subject, been a legal practitioner, and public government clients, private clients. He has seen this issue from every angle. We're so honored to have him with us today. He has one of the first major chapters in the book, and he'll be speaking at this time on the chapter. And you'll see from our agenda, we're going to keep popping him up at different events too. So please join me in welcoming Tom, who's here from Tallahassee.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Jim. I have to say that Jim's the finest person I ever fired, and a great public servant. And actually, he and Dr. DeGrove and the administration they worked for left us a wonderful foundation with which to work. I think one of the best indicators of that is that the rule they left us, Chapter 985, is essentially the same rule today that it was then. It's been the subject of a great deal of debate and criticism, but it's stood the test of time. And we would have been far worse off if we had not had that rule. I shudder to think of what we would have had to gone through in 1987 if we had had to start with the preparation of that rule, but it was all in place for us. I want to thank FAU and the Center for providing this forum for what I think is an excellent book, and also to thank again the Florida State University Department of Urban and Regional Planning and its faculty members who were the inspiration for this book and who worked so hard to put it together. It indeed, I think, is a very good product. It's a very timely 20-year evaluation of our growth management process, and I think that we can all learn from it. I think Tim is correct when he says that the 1985 Act was a wondrous thing, especially since it emerged from the legislature. In fact, it's an amazing thing to have emerged from the legislature. I think it would be very difficult today to pass an act like this. And quite frankly, I do not think we see much legislation today that has the scope, the detail, and the vision that's embodied in this act, at least as it was originally drafted. My role in the book was to provide some historical perspectives for the evaluation of the Growth Management Act. You know, we frequently hear people say, oh, the Growth Management Act's a failure. It's not working. It hasn't done what it was supposed to. I think it's very important when we make those kinds of evaluations and conclusions to keep in mind, exactly what it is we are talking about. What are we evaluating? Are we talking about the original 1985 Act, or are we talking about the Act as it has evolved over time? Because the Act has been changed significantly during the last 20 years. It's true that the basic structure of the Act is still in place, but a lot of the detail has changed. So I think we need to be very clear when we're doing our evaluations to make it very clear what we're referring to, the original vision or the Act as it has been changed. Are we talking about concept or implementation? When we say some aspect of the process created by this Act has not worked or is a failure,